So, thank you for this invitation. I'm really sorry that I wasn't be able to come and to be physically with you, but at least mentally I'm there, definitely, and now with my voices. So my name is Dea Vidović, and I'm working as a director of Kultura Foundation in Zagreb, in Croatia. Kultura Foundation is dedicated to civil society organization in contemporary arts and culture. We are a public foundation established by Republic of the Croatia, and foundation is a result of very successful bottom-up initiatives led by civil society organization, which came out with the idea of establishment of separate foundation for the purpose of non-profit, non-governmental association in contemporary arts and culture. So the foundation working as a grant-making foundation, but also as an operating foundation, which means that we organize different research and development projects and programs through which we also try to reach our mission and, of course, the vision of the foundation. And one of the topics which we tackle through our working is participatory governance in culture. And I will try to present in the next 10 minutes what we did in the last 2 years and why. So the main reason why we initiated the project or decided to work on the concept, on the issue of participatory governance is related to the new generation of cultural centers. What does it mean? It's cultural centers which initiated by grassroots initiatives, different non-profits, non-governmental associations, which started to reuse the abandoned buildings and spaces, former military buildings, factories, and so on across the country, across Croatia. And they started to adopt a new function of those buildings and accommodate those buildings for the new users. They started to share and they use spaces by many users, by many different NGOs, not only from the field of culture, then also from other fields, human rights, ecology, sports, and so on and so on. They based on horizontal principles, peer-to-peer relationship, and of course shared responsibilities. But what's also happened around the country in this new generation of cultural center, that the initiators, different civil society organizations, started negotiation with the public authorities, which basically are the owner of those infrastructure, to establish a partnership, public-civil partnership. And basically they started to implement the model of participatory governance. If we want to compare the traditional old cultural center with this new emerging cultural center, we can say that old cultural center used the top-down cultural democracy approach. On the opposite side, in emerging cultural center, we have this bottom-up cultural democracy approach. As a consequence, for the old cultural center, we are talking about right to culture for everyone in society. On the other side, emerging cultural center is related to participation in decision-making process. So it means that the old cultural center assume active participation in the cultural life, while emerging cultural center is related to the fair and equitable access for resources. If we want compared to the emerging cultural centers, which were made with the people. So this is the crucial distinction and differences between those two kind of the cultural centers. So Kultura Nova Foundation recognized this kind of the initiatives, bottom-up initiatives, which appear around the country through our grant-making programs. But we also recognize that this financial support which we give to different cultural centers or different advocacy initiatives, advocacy platforms, which try to advocate establishment of participatory governance in their particular context, so that our financial support is not enough because it's a very complex and very rich topic, and we recognize the potential of these initiatives for different kind of elements for development, which can contribute for the one side to securing spaces for civil society organization, but also for sustainable use of abandoned, neglected spaces owned by Republic of Croatia or local authorities. It's also opening up decision-making process for participation of various stakeholders. It's also help for the shifting between the passive cultural participation to very active participation, meaning participatory governance in culture, and so on and so on. And also Kultura Nova Foundation makes an attempt at productive anticipation to contribute to the development of innovative cultural policy and the innovative cultural system in the country. So based on all that reasons and rationale, we decided to develop a 2 years project, Approaches to Participatory Governance of Cultural Institutions, which supported by UNESCO International Fund for Cultural Diversity. We structured the project in 4 groups of activities: capacity building for the representative of all stakeholders involved in the cases of participatory governance, which we explored through the project. We conducted research on participatory governance model, but also on different cases around the country. We organized an interdisciplinary international conference and the publication on practices and tendency of participatory governance in culture in the Republic of Croatia. The book is divided in 2 parts. The first one is offer some insight on the model and the concept of participatory governance as such, but also what is participatory governance in culture and what is, of course, the participation in culture and what is the consequences of participation or participatory governance to the cultural democracy. And the second part of the book brings 7 case studies of 7 Croatian cases in 7 cities: Rijeka, Pula, Split, Dubrovnik, Čakovec, Karlovac, and Zagreb. And in the middle of the book, we bring also some guidelines, but I will share some of them at the end of my presentation. So what participatory governance is as a concept is basically sharing governance responsibilities among different stakeholders, basically from the public sector and the civil sector, and empowers citizens for decision-making on public issues. As a consequence of this, it means that this kind of the concept can improve democratic institutions and use for reshaping the public sector, and of course influence the way how public policy developed, make, and implement, of course. The participatory governance appeared 40 years ago in some we call the third way of democratization. It's appeared in Brazil, in Porto Alegre, and one of the most popular model of participatory governance is participatory budgeting. But after a while, the concept spread around the world, and now it's also appear in many developing countries in Europe, United States, Canada, and so on. So through our project, which we implemented since 2016 and 2018, and including our capacity building programs, which we organize for a representative of local authorities, civil society organization, which use this abandoned or former abandoned spaces and the local communities, but also through our research, we found a lot of benefits of this new kind of new public cultural spaces, which based on model of participatory governance. First of all, we found that it secure improvement of dialogue and level of cooperation between different stakeholders and rise mutual trust between all of them. And of course, increase governance capacity of the local administration, civil society organization, and local communities, in our cases, of course. It's also created the new values, new interactions, relations, new ways of engagement, and social reach could increase, of course, based on all of that, and the potential to induce positive changes and reshaping the society also appear. It's also one of the main benefits is related to distribution of public resources in much more appropriate way and provide a wider access to different groups and individuals. It means also transparent realization of stakeholders' goals and the achievement of results. And of course that it improved the ways in which citizens can participate in decision-making process and increase the scope of care for public needs and interest, which as a consequence improve of democratic process. And one of the benefits which we also found through the project is securing long-term and sustainable places of encounter of different expression and interest. But of course, through the projects, we also face a lot of challenges, which is all the time appear in the process of participatory governance implementation. One of them is related to not equal interest in participation of all stakeholders, and also the fact that all stakeholders are not familiar with the idea of participatory governance in the same level. It means that we found the lack of understanding of the terms and the concepts, and we found a huge distrust between stakeholders which come together to the same table to share responsibility in governance, to share power in governing, and also to share different interests of different stakeholders, but trying to find solution for their partnership and their collaboration in a governing of these particular cultural resources. What we also find the main challenges, specifically in a public authorities and the public sector, that the representatives of the public sector see dominantly problems without perceive of the solution. And what we faced, and now we are thinking on that a lot and trying to find the answers, if it's possible, is blurring the lines between the participation, instrumentalization, and the populism. So we know that in many cases, participation also recognized or understanding as anything goes. And also we know that the limit of democracy is very important to be aware of, because it's with the participation, it's very easy to shift or to turn to some anti-democratic, anti-pluralistic dimension and elements. So for us, is a crucial question how to balance between artistic and aesthetic values on one side and with the participation of different groups on the other side in order to develop a real model of participatory governance. In the book which I mentioned, offer some group of recommendation which is related with the question or issue of trust understanding, securing financial and expert support, creating of regulation, involvement in knowledge, then visibility, research, and be ready for changes and to have very fluid circumstances. Since we do not have issue of one size doesn't fit all, it means that the participatory governance model depends on different local contexts. In the book, we didn't offer or bring any recipe for the participatory governance model, then some kind of the guidelines, which is related to many different issues. One of them is allocation of responsibility of all stakeholders involved in the process, which share different interests and which could also influence to the conflicts. And because of that, it's necessary to create the procedure and the control mechanism and sanction and the governing of commons could be very useful for creating this kind of the control mechanism and sanction. We also suggest to creation of network structure can you hear me? Okay. So expectation, it's also important to create a realistic expectation, because many stakeholders can also face with a different kind of the expectation. Creation of different bodies in this network structure is necessarily. Also have one of the principles based on openness. It's crucial. Open for new stakeholders, but also open for exclusion some older one. The commitment of all stakeholders is necessary, and to be aware that the whole model is basically a process, is not related necessarily to the result. Participation of stakeholders, having a different kind of the resources and creating of common languages are also some of the necessity when you started to implement, or if you are in the process of development of model of participatory governance. As a conclusion, I would like to share one sentence of Nora Sernfeld, art historian, who said, participation is not simply about joining in the game. It is also about having the possibility to question the rules of the game. And this is a distinction between the participation, consultation, or giving or sharing control and power to citizens and creating the model of participatory governance. And at the end, I would like to give you a website of our projects, which could be useful for you. One is related to our project Approaches to Participatory Governance of Culture. It's participatorygovernancinculture.net. We also created a sub-website for the conference, and the book which I mentioned, Do It Together, Practices and Tendencies of Participatory Governance in Culture in the Republic of Croatia, is accessible to download free on our website. So I hope that you can see all these addresses on the slide which I sent to the organizer. And that's it. Thank you so much for your attention, and thank to organizer who invited me and accept the possibility that I participate in the conference through the Skype call. Yes, I can hear you. Yes, I can hear you well.
Vero, va lo stesso. Of some business cases throughout your country. You were mentioning of...
I didn't use the word business at all.
Sorry, yes.
I just... Yeah, I mentioned different models which we found in 7 different locations. And they are really different, even all of them based on the idea and the concept of participatory governance, which means that they involve stakeholders from the public sector and the civil sector, and also try to involve the local communities. One of the pioneering example, which is not standard till now, but we hope that it could be in the future, is a Zagreb example of a cultural center Pogon. It's a cultural center for independent culture and youth, which established by the city of Zagreb as the owner of the infrastructure and the alliance of NGOs in culture and youth on the other side. So 9 years ago, the city of Zagreb decided to develop this or establish this new institution in cooperation, in a partnership with the alliance of NGOs. And this cultural center Pogon is used as spaces for different users, for different NGOs who organize different cultural and artistic activities. The Pogon governing one former industrial spaces and the other offices in the city of Zagreb, and based on sharing between different users for their exhibitions, performances, concerts, different kind of the workshops, conferences, and so on. And the institutions are just governing the spaces which offer to different users. This is one of the examples. Another one is in Pula. Is one of the biggest building, former military building of Karlo Rojc in Pula, which used by 100 NGOs in different fields, sports, ecology, human rights, civil society, arts and culture as well. And they established alliance between NGOs and established the model of participatory governance in collaboration, in partnership with the city of Pula. City of Pula secured the spaces and pay electricity, and all other NGOs take care on the spaces and organize different kind of activities. Right now they are in the process of creating a new criteria for the users of the spaces around the buildings, because till now they didn't have clear criteria, especially for the new contract. So when someone enters to the space, they stay in the space, you know, till now. So now they're trying to establish and to think about different level of participatory governance, and one of them is when we're talking about the cultural resources, is also related, of course, to the criteria based on which someone use some spaces.
Thank you very much. That was very, very interesting and also very relevant to our case of the Cittadella, the last one particularly, because as you know, Cittadella was, although defensive, but still military infrastructure. So this is very interesting that somewhere else you have already implemented mixed models of management of public structure.
Yeah, I didn't prepare, you know, the presentation of each cases because it takes a lot of time, but you can check in the book because in the book we published 7 case studies on 7 examples, and one of them is Carlo Roy's former military building in Pula, which is in your neighborhood somehow.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. We're a little jealous. You live in a very beautiful country, indeed.
You also, with beautiful wine and food. I'm really sad that I'm not with you.
Yes, we're very sad as well, but we'll invent another excuse to have you here with us. Thank you, Dea. I don't know if there are.
Thank you, and enjoy the conference.